remain. They spoke quietly of the future plans to publish findings, to advocate for transparency about the city's hidden dimensions, to honor Elias's memory by continuing the mission he had begun. Yet beneath their words lingered the unspoken fear that the liminal space, though stable for now, was an unknown frontier fraught with dangers yet unseen. Outside, as night deepened, a small crowd gathered around a street vendor's radio. The device crackled to life, emitting a clear, haunting broadcast, the voices freed from their prison, now reaching out across the divide. Gasps and whispers spread through the onlookers, a collective acknowledgement of something extraordinary. Mara watched from a distance, her heart both heavy and lifted. The city was changing, and with it, the fragile threads of connection that bound reality to the beyond. Elias's voice was gone, but his message endured an echo beyond the storm, a promise of redemption that refused to be silenced. As the first stars pierced the clearing sky, Mara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The long night was ending, but the journey was far from over. Somewhere in the liminal space between worlds, Elias's consciousness persisted, an unseen guardian watching over the fragile bridge they had built. And as dawn approached, the city held its breath once more, poised on the edge of a new beginning. The studio was silent, except for the low hum of the machines and the faint crackle of old static as Marilyn settled into Elias's worn leather chair. Around her, the clutter of tangled wires, scattered papers, and myriad recording devices formed a chaotic shrine to the man who had vanished into the very frequencies they both sought to understand. She adjusted the headphones over her ears, the familiar weight a small comfort as she pressed play on the latest set of Elias's recordings. At first, the sounds were nothing more than the usual static hiss, the electrical storms that had become the city's grim soundtrack ever since the relentless weather had taken hold. But as the minutes stretched on, faint voices, fragile and fragmented, emerged beneath the noise. They were not the voices they had heard before, the desperate pleas from the trapped realm, but something different, subtle shifts in tone, patterns in the interference, as if Elias himself was reaching out from somewhere beyond. Mara's breath caught. She leaned closer to the speakers, straining to catch the nuances hidden within the white noise. The crackled whispers ebbed and flowed like ghostly tendrils, brushing against the edges of her consciousness. A pang of sorrow washed over her. Elias was gone, sacrificed himself to save those voices. Yet these recordings suggested he had not entirely left them behind. She withdrew a notebook from the cluttered desk, flipping to a page filled with Elias's frantic scrawling's waveforms, frequency notations, and cryptic annotations about liminal spaces and consciousness transfer. Her finger traced the lines as her mind pieced together the puzzle he had left behind. Elias had theorized that the storms created overlapping dimensional layers, and that the static was more than noise. It was a veil, a medium for trapped consciousnesses to persist. Mara's eyes flicked to the monitors where audio waveforms danced erratically. She opened specialized software Elias had been developing, designed to filter and amplify signals buried deep within the chaos. As the program ran, a new pattern emerged, a repeating sequence interwoven with the static, subtle enough to have been missed, but unmistakably deliberate. Her pulse quickened. Had Elias embedded a message within his final transmissions? Was this his way of saying he was still there, somewhere between worlds? She played back the filtered audio repeatedly. The sequence resolved itself into faint syllables, fragments of words, then a voice soft, tired, but unmistakably Elias's. Mara, listen, not gone. Still here, between. A tear slipped down her cheek. The studio, once a place of cold technical work, now felt charged with presence, a bridge spanning the chasm of absence. She whispered his name, a fragile hope blossoming amidst the ruins of grief. The next morning, Mara met with Dr. Kalen Sato in a small cafe near the studio. The scientist's pale eyes reflected cautious optimism, as Mara shared her findings. Doctor, Sato adjusted his glasses thoughtfully, considering the implications. If what you're hearing is true, he said quietly, it means Elias's consciousness has imprinted onto the liminal frequencies. He's become part of the signal, neither fully here nor entirely gone. Mara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. It's both beautiful and heartbreaking. He gave everything to free those voices, and now he's one with them. They discussed plans to refine the equipment, to track and perhaps even communicate with Elias's lingering presence. The city outside was waking, the oppressive storms finally giving way to a fragile calm. The ominous static that once dominated the soundscape was thinning, replaced by subtle hums and the distant echoes of a changed reality. Back in the studio, Mara sat alone once more. The air was thick with anticipation as she placed the headphones carefully over her ears. The static swelled, then receded, revealing a clarity she had never heard before. Mara, Elias's voice whispered through the speakers, faint but unmistakable. Hope remains beyond the storm. Mara smiled through tears, clutching the recorder to her chest. She knew the journey was far from over. Elias's sacrifice had opened a door, but the real work, the connection, the understanding, had only just begun. Outside, the city breathed a new rhythm. The lingering echoes of Elias's voice wove through the streets, a haunting melody of sacrifice, hope, and the unyielding human will to reach beyond the known. And in that fragile harmony, Mara found the strength to carry on. The dawn broke with an unfamiliar softness, the oppressive weight of the electrical storms lifting just enough to reveal a city transformed. Mara Lynn stood at the edge of her apartment balcony, eyes scanning the horizon where the usual jagged silhouettes of lightning had, for the first time in years, faded into a gentle wash of pale light. The air was different, not just in temperature or scent, but in its very texture. Gone was the constant crackle and buzz of static that had defined the city's soundscape, replaced by a subtle, almost musical hum that whispered through the empty streets. She inhaled deeply, the cool, fresh air filling her lungs with a sense of renewal she hadn't dared to hope for. For years, the city had been imprisoned beneath an unending shroud of storms and interference, each thundering pulse a reminder of the unseen battles waged in frequencies beyond human perception. Now, that storm was retreating, leaving behind a silence that was almost sacred in its rarity. Inside her small apartment, the walls were lined with screens and recording devices, remnants of a past era of obsession. Mara's fingers brushed over the worn edges of Elias's notes and recordings, now preserved like fragile relics. Elias Vorn had been the catalyst for this change, the man who dared to listen when everyone else had turned away. His sacrifice had been the final key that unlocked the liminal space, bridging the chasm between worlds and silencing the static that had haunted the city for so long. She turned to the comlink, reaching out to Dr. Kalen Sato, whose lab was nestled deep within the heart of the city's research district. The line crackled briefly before the scientist's calm voice filled the room. "Good morning, Mara. The readings are stable. The storm activity has dropped to levels we haven't recorded since before the first anomalies appeared. It's as if the city is breathing again." Mara nodded, though he couldn't see her. "What about the frequencies? Is the hidden broadcast still active?" "There's a new baseline now," Sato replied, his tone measured but optimistic. "A subtle pulse beneath the surface, a resonance that suggests the liminal space is no longer collapsing, but stabilizing. It's faint but persistent, almost like a heartbeat." Mara allowed herself a small smile. A heartbeat. After all this time, that's the kind of signal we needed. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, the laughter of children playing in a nearby park. Mara's gaze drifted to the window, where small groups of residents cautiously ventured outside, their faces illuminated by the soft morning light. For the first time in memory, the streets felt less like a battleground and more like home. As the day unfolded, Mara wandered through the city, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts around her. The usual harsh glare of neon signs was tempered by the gentle glow of dawn. The relentless hum of machinery replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the occasional distant bird call. Even the air seemed charged with a new energy, not the destructive fury of storms past, but the fragile promise of renewal. At a small cafe, Mara overheard conversations filled with cautious optimism. Residents spoke of the calm, speculating on what it meant for their future. Some whispered about Elias, recounting tales of the sound engineer who had vanished into the static to save voices trapped beyond their world. His name was no longer spoken with fear, but with reverence. Later, Mara met with Dr. Sato in his laboratory, a sterile space filled with blinking consoles and humming machines. He pointed to a series of graphs displayed on a large monitor, each line tracing the city's electromagnetic activity over time. "See this," he said, tapping the screen. "This is the storm's descent, an unprecedented drop in interference. And here, beneath the noise floor, a new frequency emerges. It's stable, coherent, and unlike anything we've recorded before." Mara leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Could it be the voices? The ones Elias was trying to reach? Sato nodded slowly. "It's possible. Whatever it is, it represents a new phase, a connection, not a barrier, but it's delicate. We can't be sure what this new balance means long term." The scientist's words echoed the uncertainty lingering in Mara's mind. The city was breathing easier, yes, but the scars of the past storms ran deep. The silent authority that had sought to suppress knowledge still lurked in shadows, and the liminal spaces remained a mystery. As twilight descended, Mara climbed to the rooftop of her building, the city stretching beneath her in a tapestry of dimming lights. The air was cool, carrying faint whispers of static, or perhaps memory, that seemed to dance just beyond hearing. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her, a bittersweet symphony of loss and hope. Elias's voice echoed in her mind, a final transmission that had transcended worlds. He had given everything to open the door, to offer rescue to those trapped beyond the storm. Now, as the city settled into uneasy peace, Mara felt the weight of that sacrifice. But beneath the melancholy, there was a spark, a fragile thread of connection weaving through the quiet night. The city was waking up from its long nightmare, and though the future remained uncertain, the dawn had come, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. The room was thick with a low hum of static, a sound that had become both a comfort and a torment to Mara Lynn. She sat cross-legged on the worn floor of Elias's studio, the walls lined with tangled wires, archaic audio equipment, and stacks of notebooks filled with indecipherable scrawl. The faint glow of the monitor cast pale light across her determined face as she pressed play on the battered tape recorder. Elias's voice emerged from the crackling static, fragile and distant, as if carried across an impossible gulf. "If you're hearing this, then maybe I'm not completely lost. Maybe there's still a chance. Listen closely, the static isn't just noise. It's a veil. Behind it, there are voices, trapped, suffering. They need us." The words wove a thread of bittersweet connection through Mara's chest, tightening and loosening with each breath. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was as if Elias spoke directly to her, his presence lingering in the ether, defying the silence his disappearance had enforced. For weeks now, Mara had been haunted by these recordings, fragments of Elias's last days, and his unyielding hope threaded through the static haze. The city outside remained indifferent or worse, complicit in guarding its secrets. The oppressive electrical storms still raged, the sky a perpetual canvas of flickering neon and restless shadows. Yet in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to pause beneath the crackle of interference, Elias's voice was the tether that kept her grounded. She rose and paced, the soft scrape of her boots on the scuffed floor the only sound besides the static chorus. Her mind raced with memories of their shared frustration, the late-night debates, and the city's indifferent gaze. Elias had vanished into the liminal space he sought to understand, leaving behind a void filled with static and unanswered questions. Determined not to let his sacrifice dissolve into oblivion, Mara had begun to speak out. The next morning, she found herself seated at a cluttered cafe table, facing a skeptical panel of city officials and investigative journalists. Her short hair was damp from the rain, her eyes sharp and unyielding as she laid out the evidence Elias had gathered, recordings, data analyses, and personal testimonies. "The storms are not just weather phenomena," she insisted, voice steady despite the tension hanging thickly in the air. "They are the surface expression of a deeper fracture between worlds, between realities." Elias uncovered a hidden frequency, a broadcast from a trapped realm crying out for rescue. The officials exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting uncomfortably, others dismissing her as a zealot. Mara pressed on, refusing to be silenced. "This isn't just about science or technology, it's about human lives. We owe it to Elias, and to those voices, to bring these truths into the light." Outside, the city pulsed with its usual restless energy. Mara stepped into the rain-soaked streets, the neon signs flickering erratically overhead. Drops splattered against her coat, mingling with the static buzz in her ears. She paused beneath a fractured street lamp, the glow casting fractured shadows that danced like ghosts. For a moment, she thought she heard Elias's voice, carried on the wind, a spectral echo that stirred both sorrow and hope. Her footsteps echoed through the alleyways as she made her way home. The weight of solitude pressed against her, but beneath it was a resolve forged in grief and determination. She was no longer just a witness to Elias's mission. She was its torchbearer. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of a community art space, Mara stood before a mural that had been commissioned in Elias's memory. It depicted the storm-racked cityscape, swirling with vibrant streaks of static, shadowed figures reaching out across the painted divide. She traced a finger along the jagged lines, feeling a connection deeper than words could express. "I won't let you be forgotten," she whispered, her breath misting the glass that protected the artwork. "Your voice will carry on in the storm, in the silence, in the static. We'll find a way together." The city outside began to calm as the storm slowly waned, but Mara knew the battle was far from over. The silent authorities still lurked in the shadows, their grip tightening against the tide of truth. Yet, armed with Elias's recordings and her own indomitable spirit, Mara was prepared to face whatever came next. In the fading light, the static hummed softly, a reminder that even in absence, connection endures. And somewhere beyond the veil, Elias's voice lingered, a beacon in the storm, urging her onward. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Mara's resolve was clear. The silence would be broken, the hidden signals revealed, and the voices trapped beyond the static would finally find their rescue. Until then, she would carry their memory like a fragile flame in the night, lighting the path through the storm's quiet aftermath. The conference room was steeped in a haze of low light and anticipation. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of a handful of academics and journalists, their faces etched with curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Kalen Sato stood poised behind the podium, his thin frame almost swallowed by the oversized lab coat that had become his trademark. His pale fingers adjusted the microphone as the projector flickered to life, casting a faint glow over his neatly arranged slides. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sato began, his voice steady despite the gravity of his revelations. "After years of investigation into the city's electromagnetic anomalies and the recordings left behind by the late Elias Vorn, we have finally begun to understand the presence of liminal spaces, transitory zones, where the fabric between our reality and others thins and distorts." The crowd leaned in, a murmur rippling through the room. Sato detailed the experimental methods used to detect these zones, correlating storm activity with bursts of unexplained frequencies. He carefully navigated the line between empirical evidence and theoretical implications, knowing full well how fragile the acceptance of such ideas would be. Meanwhile, in a cramped lab cluttered with humming servers and tangled wires, Mara Lin sat beside Sato. Their faces were bathed in the iridescent light emitted from monitors displaying Elias's last transmissions. "He never stopped searching," Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the chorus of static that filled the room. Sato nodded solemnly, his eyes reflecting the flickering waveforms. "His sacrifice wasn't in vain," Sato murmured. "Now we have a foundation of scientific foothold to explore what was once relegated to myth and paranoia." As the night deepened, the academic community's response was a mixture of excitement and incredulity. Online forums buzzed with heated debates. Some hailed the paper as a breakthrough that could redefine physics and metaphysics alike, while others dismissed it as fanciful speculation. News outlets ran cautious headlines, "New Dimensions," "Scientist publishes controversial study," and "Liminal spaces, science or science fiction." Amid the clamor, Mara found herself on the city's rooftop at dawn, the cold rain slicking her hair to her scalp. The storm clouds had thinned, leaving behind a fragile stillness, pierced by the faint hum of residual static. She clutched Elias's portable recorder, tuning the dial with trembling hands. A soft, almost imperceptible frequency emerged, an echo of the voices Elias had devoted his life to freeing. A fragile hope blossomed within her chest, mingled with the ache of loss and the weight of uncertainty. Somewhere beyond the storms, connections were rekindling, fragile threads weaving new possibilities between worlds. The path ahead was uncertain, but the door had been opened, and the human urge to reach beyond the known burned brighter than ever. As Mara listened, the city around her slowly awoke, bathed in the muted light of a new dawn, one where isolation might give way to connection, and where the echoes of sacrifice resonated as a promise for what could come next. The journey was far from over, but with Sato's findings illuminating the path, a cautious optimism took root amidst the ruins of static and shadow. The question lingered like the fading storm: would humanity have the courage to follow it? The city had changed, though the change was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Mara Lin sat cross-legged on the floor of her modest apartment, the hum of numerous devices filling the air with a low, steady pulse. A bank of monitors flickered before her, streams of data scrolling in rapid succession. Dr. Kalen Sato stood behind her, adjusting the settings on an antique radio receiver salvaged from a forgotten corner of the city. The storm that had once raged relentlessly, drowning the city in static and electrical fury, had quieted to a gentle flicker of neon lightning in the distance. The oppressive hum that had been the city's constant companion was now a soft melody, threading itself through the urban noise like a whispered promise. "Look at this," Mara said, her voice breaking the silence as she pointed to a cluster of waveforms on the largest screen. The patterns pulsed with a rhythm that was both alien and familiar, a delicate dance of frequencies weaving through the ether. "It's new." Sato adjusted his glasses, his pale face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. A signal emerging from the static. "I've never seen anything quite like it. The harmonics suggest a stabilized transmission, but there's a complexity, here layers of modulation that imply an intelligence behind it." Mara's fingers danced over the keyboard, isolating fragments of the broadcast. The speakers crackled softly before a voice, distorted but unmistakably human, filtered through the noise. It was faint, fragile like a candle struggling against the wind, but it carried a message that resonated deep within them. "Thank you," the voice whispered, barely audible, then faded into a shimmering silence. Mara's breath caught, and she glanced at Sato, who nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the same mixture of disbelief and hope. "It's them," Mara whispered, "the voices." They're reaching out. Outside, the city breathed differently. The usual cacophony of electric interference was replaced by a strange harmony, a delicate undercurrent that twisted through the air like a secret song. Neon lights flickered softly, casting long shadows that no longer felt oppressive, but imbued with a new kind of life. The storms, which had once been relentless and cruel, now seemed to recede into memory. Mara stepped onto her balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She gazed out over the cityscape, towering skyscrapers adorned with holographic ads, streets alive with restless energy, and the distant silhouette of the liminal zone where realities converged. In the quiet, she felt a presence, an echo of Elias's voice carried within the renewed signal. It was as if he lingered still, a guardian watching over the fragile bridge they had forged between worlds. The discovery was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a testament to resilience, to the relentless human urge to connect across impossible divides. Yet Mara knew the path ahead was uncertain. The silent authority, though weakened, had not vanished. The delicate harmony they had found could yet be shattered by old fears and new threats. But for now, hope blossomed amid the remnants of static noise. The rescued voices had found a way to speak once more, their whispers transforming into a chorus that promised a future where isolation could be broken and connection, no matter how fragile, could endure. Mara turned back inside, her heart pounding with renewed purpose. She and Sato would continue their work, guarding this new dawn. The signal was renewed, and with it, the possibility of a world transformed. As the city settled into an uneasy peace, one thing was clear. The echo between the realms would never be silenced again. And somewhere, deep within the shifting currents of the liminal space, Elias listened on, a faint smile tracing the edges of his consciousness. The signal was no longer just static, it was a beacon, a lifeline, a promise. But would it hold? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the city beneath the calm sky pulsed quietly, waiting. The city had changed. The incessant electrical storms that once screamed across the sky had dwindled to a rare, distant rumble, and the static that had blanketed the airwaves like a suffocating fog was now a gentle whisper, a fragile breath of something new. From the rooftop where I stood, the horizon stretched wide and electric, but the storm's fury had softened, the neon glow of billboards flickering faintly beneath a sky that was, for the first time in years, almost calm. I pulled my coat tighter against the chill, the wind carrying a scent of ozone and cold rain, a smell so familiar, now it felt like a memory etched into my bones. Below me, the city's streets wound like veins, pulsing with a quiet life that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. I thought of Elias, his tired eyes, the way his fingers had danced over the controls, chasing sounds only he could hear. His sacrifice had carved a silence deeper than any storm, but within it, a promise. Back inside my small apartment, the cluttered desk was strewn with Elias's recordings and notes, a chaotic symphony of waveforms and scribbled annotations that pulsed with his voice and his obsession. I traced the jagged lines with trembling fingers, the static, the hidden signals, the desperate pleas from a world trapped beyond our own. Each crackle and hiss was a thread, a lifeline to something lost and yet to be found. The weight of his absence pressed down on me, but beneath the grief was a flicker of determination. Elias had bridged a chasm no one else dared approach. Now it was my turn to carry the torch, to unravel the threads he had left behind. I played the recordings again and again, letting the fragmented voices seep into the silence, learning their patterns, their rhythms. They were no longer just static. They were echoes of hope. A knock at the door drew me from my reverie. Dr. Kalen Sato stepped inside, his thin frame casting a long shadow across the floor. His pale eyes held that familiar mix of scientific curiosity and moral ambiguity. We had come a long way from our initial distrust, bound now by the shared burden of knowledge and the cost it demanded. "The city's changing," he said softly, removing his coat. "The storms are fewer, the static less oppressive. But the balance is fragile. This quiet, it could break at any moment." I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Elias's sacrifice opened something. A window, maybe. But it's up to us to keep it from closing. To make sure the voices don't fade back into silence. He sighed, adjusting his glasses. "And the authority, they won't let this go easily. Control is their currency. Transparency is a threat." "Then we'll make them see," I replied, a fierce resolve settling in my chest. "The city deserves to know. The people deserve to hear the truth beneath the static." Our conversation was interrupted by the soft hum of my equipment powering up. A faint new frequency emerged, delicate and wavering, threading through the quiet air like a tentative heartbeat. I leaned closer, eyes closed, letting the fragile signal wash over me. It was a whisper of connection, a promise that the voices were still reaching out, still fighting to be heard. The quiet between storms was no longer empty. It was alive with possibility, a delicate balance between isolation and connection. The journey had cost us dearly, but in the stillness, I found a kind of peace, a bittersweet hope that the story was far from over. As night deepened, the city below shimmered with neon and shadow, a cyberpunk tapestry woven from light and silence. And in that darkness, I felt Elias's presence, a quiet echo beyond the storm, guiding me toward a dawn yet to come. The silence was no longer a void. It was a signal, a call to listen, to remember, and to reach beyond the known into the vast, uncharted static of possibility. But even as hope flickered, a question lingered in the back of my mind, sharp and insistent. How far was I willing to go to keep the connection alive? And what would it cost me to answer the quiet between? The city waited, breath held, caught in the fragile balance of a new dawn. And so did I. The storm had finally reached its crescendo, a violent symphony of crackling electricity and howling wind that seemed to tear the very fabric of the city apart. Inside the liminal nexus, the air pulsed with an almost tangible energy. Elias Vorn stood at the heart of it, surrounded by the flickering shadows and whispers that had become his constant companions. His hands trembled as he adjusted the final settings on the device, a complex amalgamation of salvage tech and experimental modifications, crafted to stabilize the fragile boundary between worlds. "This is it," he murmured to himself, voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. The static that had once haunted his every waking moment now seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, a living presence that both comforted and unnerved him. With a final flick of a switch, the device hummed to life, sending waves of coherent energy rippling outward into the darkness. From the depths of the static, voices emerged clearer, stronger, no longer mere fragments, but a chorus of souls reaching across the divide. "We hear you," Elias whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "You're not alone anymore." His transmission crackled through the storm, a message of hope and resolve sent into the void. To those trapped beyond the veil, his voice echoed, "I promise rescue. Though I may vanish from your world, my connection remains. Hold on." As the last words left his lips, the device surged, the boundaries between realities shimmering and folding like paper. A blinding light enveloped Elias, pulling him away from the city he loved, from Mara and Dr. Sato and the life he once knew. The storm outside began to wane, the oppressive static receding like a tide. Hours later, Mara stood beneath the clearing sky, the aftermath of the tempest painting the city in muted hues. Clutching Elias' final recording, she let the haunting melody of his voice wash over her, a bittersweet balm for the aching void. "He's gone," she whispered, "but not lost." In a dimly lit lab, Dr. Kalen Sato analyzed the residual signals emanating from the liminal space. The patterns defied conventional science, complex and alive, hinting at Elias' consciousness persisting beyond known dimensions. "This is only the beginning," he mused, eyes gleaming with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Outside, the city breathed under an unusually calm sky. The familiar electrical storms had faded, replaced by a delicate hum, a subtle, persistent static that carried faint, hopeful voices. It was a reminder that connection, no matter how fragile, endured. Elias' sacrifice had opened a door, a fragile bridge between worlds that promised redemption and understanding. Yet beneath the quiet lay questions unanswered, mysteries lingering like shadows at the edge of perception. As the city settled into uneasy peace, the echoes beyond the storm whispered of futures yet to be written. The end was not an end at all, but a beginning, a testament to the relentless human urge to reach beyond the known, to connect, to hope. And in that quiet space between worlds, Elias' voice lived on, a beacon in the static, calling out across the void. The storm had passed, but its echoes would resonate forever.